Well, hello, and welcome back to NFBC Sunday School Online as we continue now our journey through the book of Proverbs, as we are continuing through this Lifeway Explore the Bible series. And we're now on lesson 15, so we've been doing these videos for 15 weeks now, and we're longing to get back together again to be in classes. And we don't know when that day will be. We know we'll be hopefully. We're praying about that and seeking wisdom, and hopefully you're praying along with us. Until then, we'll continue to give these videos every week as we seek to just continue to find opportunities for us to be together in God's Word and to study His Word together. I know personally I've been benefiting from this study of Proverbs, just a reminder week after week, and we're going to have it again, of pursuing wisdom, and that in pursuing wisdom, we're not pursuing just the ability to make a choice in a moment, but we're pursuing a right relationship with God. We're pursuing His glory, and I hope that you're benefiting from these as well. So we're in Proverbs chapter 4, verses 11 through 27 today, and I hope you'll read along with me. Proverbs chapter 4, verses 11 through 27. So I am teaching you the way of wisdom. I am guiding you on straight paths. When you walk, your steps will not be hindered. When you run, you will not stumble. Hold on to instruction. Don't let go. Guard it, for it is your life. Keep off the path of the wicked. Don't proceed on the way of evil ones. Avoid it. Don't travel on it. Turn away from it and pass it by, for they can't sleep unless they have done what is evil. They are robbed of sleep unless they make someone stumble. They eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. The path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, shining brighter and brighter until midday. But the way of the wicked is like the darkest gloom. They don't know what makes them stumble. My son, pay attention to my words. Listen closely to my sayings. Don't lose sight of them. Keep them within your heart, for they are life to those who find them, and health to one's whole body. Guard your heart above all else, for it is the source of life. Don't let your mouth speak dishonestly, and don't let your lips talk deviously. Let your eyes look forward. Fix your gaze straight ahead. Carefully consider the path for your feet, and all your ways will be established. Don't turn to the right or to the left. Keep your feet away from evil. As always, it's important for us as we seek to read Scripture, as we seek to understand what God is saying to us, to understand every passage we're reading in light of context. And we have the immediate context of this passage, and we have the total context of all of Scripture. And the immediate context of this passage is it comes after verses 1 through chapters 1 through 3, and then after verses 1 through 11. It seems really reasonable. We're in Proverbs chapter 4, verses 11 through 27, so we need to see what the previous verses and chapters are about. So this came from our book, and I thought it was a good summary of what we've been through so far. It says chapters 1 through 3, Solomon laid out the dimensions of God's wisdom. He then called God's people to listen and pay attention. He knew that information does not necessarily mean transformation, and facts do not always lead to obedient faith. Solomon urged God's people to hear and apply God's truth. So it's an overview of those first 3 chapters, what we've kind of looked like at in many ways these last few weeks. And then right before this, in verses 1 through 11, Solomon is explaining, 1 through 10, Solomon is explaining the path of wisdom. So after he goes explaining this path of wisdom, he's going to really encourage his readers and his son in this passage as he's speaking to his son, to follow that path, to follow the way of wisdom. So we're going to have 2 encouragements and 1 reminder as we walk through this passage together. The first is an encouragement to follow the way. Verses 11 through 13. I am teaching you the way of wisdom. I am guiding you on straight paths. When you walk, your steps will not be hindered, and when you run, you will not stumble. And then he says, verse 13, hold on to it. Don't let go. Guard it. For it, the way of wisdom, instruction, is your life. Something interesting here that I think we need to remind ourselves and need to remember in the midst of this encouragement is that wisdom is a pattern, not a moment. It is a path you take. It is a way in which you walk. It is not the ability to make a good decision in particularly important moments. So often we think of wisdom when we think of large moments in life where we need to choose between two paths. And we keep asking ourselves, what is the wise thing to do? And Proverbs over and over and over has been teaching us that the goal isn't just the ability to make wise decisions in the moment, but that as you pursue a path of wisdom, that moment by moment, you're seeking to follow the Lord and you're seeking to follow the way of wisdom. As you're doing that moment by moment, it makes the bigger decisions that much easier to understand the will of the Lord and understand wisdom because you've been doing it in the clear things and in these moment by moment small decisions. I mean, Jesus talks about the narrow path and the wide path. Like, narrow is the path that leads to life and wide is the path that leads to destruction. He calls himself the way, the truth, and the life. And he's calling us to follow him, not to just get a list of rules and principles and guidelines to be able to input them in a moment to make a right decision to where your life will be better. But as we moment by moment are displaying a pattern of seeking to follow the one who is wisdom, the one who is the way, the truth, and the life, as we're seeking to display the glory of God in our lives, we will then, in those significant moments, make the wise choice because we are moment by moment pursuing the way of wisdom. And so Solomon once again encourages his son and encourages all readers that we are to pursue the way of wisdom in our life. But not only does he encourage him to follow the way of wisdom, he also encourages us to avoid the path of the wicked. Keep off the path. Look, like, notice the statements that are here. Keep off. Don't proceed. Avoid. Don't travel on it. Turn away from it. Pass it by. I mean, he is calling, encouraging, begging for his son to not go along with the path of the wicked. And he gives them a reason. For they can't sleep unless they've done what is evil. They're robbed of sleep unless they make someone stumble. Now, he's kind of using some symbolic, poetic, metaphorical language to show the fact that wickedness is never satisfied. Like, our sinful soul, our sinful inclinations are never satisfied. And they're never going to bring us satisfaction. And so his phrasing here is saying, look, they won't sleep. They're going to do everything they can to find someone to stumble, is him saying every single moment and every single day they're going to be pursuing satisfaction. And if they're pursuing wickedness, if that is what they're pursuing to satisfy their hearts, then they're never going to be satisfied. Like, every day they're going to be pursuing that satisfaction. They're not going to find it. But the way of wisdom, Jesus says that if we are pursuing satisfaction in him, we will always be satisfied. And he says that he is the stream of living water. Out of him is flowing streams of living water. That if anyone is thirsty, we can come to him for drink, and we will always be satisfied. But yet, if we're pursuing wickedness, if we're pursuing sinfulness, even if we grasp it in the moment, it will never truly satisfy us. Day after day after day, we're pursuing something that isn't going to be able to satisfy us. So that's what he says in verse 17. They eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. The path of the righteous is like light of dawn, shining brighter and brighter until midday. But the wicked is like the darkest gloom, and they don't know what makes them stumble. And in 1 John, we are given this image that there is darkness within those who are sinful. And not just that, but that they're blinded by sinfulness. So he says there's darkness inside of them, and outside of them they are blinded by their sinfulness. So they can't see what is good. And the same thing is what Solomon here is calling us in Romans, is if you're pursuing sin, you're blinded to the way of righteousness. You're blinded to what's causing you to stumble and causing you to not be satisfied. You're blinded to the realities of life. So wickedness is never satisfied. And because of that, he then once again reminds the reader to remain on the right path. He begins with 4 reminders. Pay attention, verse 20. Listen closely, verse 20. Don't lose sight, verse 21. Keep them within your heart, verse 21. Over and over and over, reminding his people, reminding the reader, reminding God's people to be pursuing the right path and follow the right path. And it should be noted, this is a continual refrain in these first 4 verses as we sing in our applications here in a couple minutes, that the continual refrain of wisdom is that wisdom must be pursued, it must be followed, we must be intentional moment by moment to pursue the way of wisdom, because our natural inclination is going to be conformed to the pattern of this world, to be conformed to the sinfulness of our hearts. And Solomon is begging us, encouraging us to not do that. And then he says, verse 23, guard your heart above all else. As he's reminding us to remain on the right path, he's saying your ability to remain on the right path is based upon your ability to guard your heart. That your heart, not your activity, is going to define whether or not you're on the path of wisdom or the path of wickedness. And so as you seek to remain on the path, you must be intentional about guarding your heart against the things that your heart will be turned toward. Because our hearts are desperately wicked above all things. Our hearts, even as redeemed sinners, even as those who've been given a new heart, we still have kind of just the results and the habits of the flesh, and those temptations, those times that we were satisfied in a moment by sinfulness, those things remain in us. We remember what it feels like to satisfy ourselves in a moment with sinfulness, and that sin is pleasurable for a season, and so our flesh wants to return to those pleasures because we feel those pleasures in the moment. They may not ultimately satisfy, but they feel pleasurable in the moment, and so our hearts keep turning in that way, and when we turn that way, we veer off of the way of wisdom, we veer off of following God and the glory of God, and we veer off towards the way of wickedness, and the way of sinfulness, and the way of the world. So Solomon is begging his son and begging all of us to guard your heart. But the question is, how do we do that? How do we go about guarding our hearts to where we're not just doing what is right, but we are doing it out of an overflow of the things that we feel and love? And I think you can read these next 4 verses all as ways in which you guard your heart. I mean, I think we can clearly say one way in which we guard our hearts is to feast on the things of the Lord, to feast on his word, to feast in corporate worship, and to be gathering together to honor him. But he doesn't say that. He goes from that to don't let your mouth speak dishonestly, and don't let your lips talk deviously. He talks about actions, and he's saying there's this intimate connection between what you allow yourself to do and what your heart feels in a moment. That the more you speak dishonestly and talk deviously and you gaze towards things that are sinful and wicked, the more you see those things and do those things, the more your heart is going to be turned towards those things. So he's saying there's a cause and effect relationship that goes both ways. As our heart is changed, it changes behaviors. But he is here saying your behavior can also change your heart. That you can act your way into feeling differently. One of the recommendations that I have read numerous times when it pertains to rearing children and it pertains to loving my wife is that you can act your way into loving someone. Even if the emotions are not there for someone you love, as you act lovingly towards them, it changes your heart and changes how you feel in the moment. So then you begin to act lovingly out of the love that is in your heart. And that's what Solomon's saying. Consider your path. Don't let your eyes turn one way. Don't talk a certain way. Don't say things that are not honest and trustworthy and noble, because guarding your heart is connected to guarding your behavior. I mean, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. There's an intimate connection between the things that we do, the things that we say, and what we feel in the moment and what we believe. And Solomon is encouraging us again to remain on the right path, and the pattern to do that, the way we remain on that right path, is by guarding our hearts. And one way in which we guard our hearts is by doing what is right. So a couple of applications of things that we need to remember. The first is that we are to pursue the wise path. And every week so far, as we've studied Proverbs, this has been one of the applications that we are to pursue, to remain, to seek after wisdom. And I said earlier, the reason being is our natural temptation is to turn away from those things, and to not be pursuing the things that God would have us pursue. Then he says to forsake the path of wickedness. That's an action. We are actively not following the path of wickedness. If we are actively pursuing the wise path, then we are in turn actively forsaking the path of wickedness and disdaining that. And the last thing is to guard your heart. He's calling us to do that. And so we need to think through in our lives, what does it mean for me to guard my heart? Or the things that I'm watching, things that I'm reading, things that I may not be doing. You may be actively doing something that's causing your heart to not be guarded, but you also can be passively not doing things that would protect your heart. Have you fallen into a pattern where you're not reading his word regularly? Have you fallen into a pattern where you're not praying regularly and gathering corporately with believers? And that may be more difficult now, but it's still important to pursue those opportunities for us to gather together, to encourage one another, to spur one another on towards love and good works, to spur one another on towards pursuing the wise path, to mutually encourage one another to walk in the way of wisdom. So some examination questions for us all. First is, what is keeping me from choosing the way of wisdom? At every moment, there are barriers and things in life that are keeping us from doing what his word is seeking us to do. So it may be things that we think will satisfy us that we're pursuing, that his word says to us will not satisfy. And maybe relationships that we may need to remove from our lives that is not protecting our hearts and not guarding our hearts properly. But we need to consider what it looks like, those things that are keeping us from the way of wisdom. And then the active question, what am I doing to guard my heart? What behaviors and habits and disciplines can I ingrain in my life to regularly remind myself to guard my heart? Church, it's been a blessing. Hopefully these things bless you, and I look forward to gathering together again as we continue this study next week.